And so, Justina, we're good to go? Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Michael Wenderoth, and Get Promoted is my first book. And in the spirit of do one thing every day that scares you, I thought it would be a little bit scary in a fun way to invite a seasoned author and a pretty dynamic executive coach that I admire, Benita Patterson, to interview me and to have a conversation. Benita is the CEO of Polaris Consulting, and her two books that she's written, Communication Under Fire, I think is very appropriate in this moment, and Emotional Intelligence in Action are two of her books. And I invited her also with the theme of connections because we know each other thanks to Kara Williams, Stanford leader, who introduced the two of us, and as they say, the rest is history. What I like about Benita and why also invited her was that when we talked, she just, in a very good coaching way, cuts past kind of the flowery language and goes right to it. So on that note, while she'll be asking the questions, she has allowed me to turn some of them back to her. I thought that would be interesting because she is a seasoned author, and we could talk a lot about those pieces. Now, if you do have things that you want to raise, I know Benita and I have a bunch of questions and we kind of work in the moment. Feel free to put them into the chat board. We're going to kind of queue up and do kind of laser responses to things. We thought that would be kind of a fun and useful way. And so on that note, Benita, welcome to Stanford, the community. We know that you've been around a lot of places. We both realize we're both from Philadelphia, but thank you for joining us and for grilling me here in our
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Benita, just to kick it off, I will ask the first question here is, people can see all about you on LinkedIn through your company, Polaris, which is based in Denver. But I always like to say, well, what's one thing that people should know about you that they wouldn't be able to find on the internet these days?
Well, the one thing would be something that might seem abstract, but I think it's the most concrete thing ever. And that is, I am an active seeker of meaning, and not necessarily finding meaning as much as the meaning of meaning and the role of meaning and how it shapes outcomes and inspires people and how people can leverage it to inspire themselves. And I find that evolving understanding really informs my work, and it's personally satisfying and it's professionally satisfying. So that's what you won't see. Seeker of meaning.
Love it. I love it.
So I would say, what I know that you, Michael, you've been you're a consultant for the last 20 years, but you spent many years as a business person in leading edge businesses across the world, across Europe, across China, and the United States. So you're known for your contrarian views and your contrarian opinions. You are also a plain speaking person. So your contrarian views have shown up in Harvard Business Review and Forbes, and now I am so thrilled that you have captured them in your book. And I love your book because it's got such a clear title: Get Promoted. What you're really missing at work that's holding you back. And I think so many people have that feeling that they're missing the secret. Even though they're getting ahead and they're moving along, they feel like they're missing something and they don't know what they're missing. And this really fills in the gap. So first of all, thanks for writing the book. I've read it already, and I'm so excited about it because it was an easy read. It wasn't an assignment, it was fun. It felt like I was having a conversation with you, and you were making me smarter as I was having that conversation. So thank you for that. But I'm going to turn your question back on you. So with all the things we know about you and we can find out on the internet, what's a juicy tidbit about you that we can't find out on the internet?
So this is interesting because it was in the internet era, and I'm surprised. But this point that you brought about making meaning, which is, you know, understanding things, that really kind of has always driven me. And so one of the vehicles I use to do that is to write. I think that really kind of sharpens my thinking, especially when I have to express that. And I'm kind of bummed that you cannot find it on the internet, but really one of my first big articles that I wrote, we go back to 1998, was in Newsweek. They used to have this My Turn column. And it doesn't appear up on the internet. I'm bummed about it, but I had been living in China for many years, and I'd come back to the States, and I felt like the US just totally didn't understand what was going on in China, and was actually very hypocritical about certain things, from human rights and so forth. And so I wrote that article. It's probably one of my favorite pieces. And you know, back now I love writing because you get instant feedback. But back then you got, like, they literally, the editor mailed me the letters to the editor. And yeah, it was a pretty polemical piece. Some Americans were not very happy with what I had to write. But I think through that feedback loop was really fascinating. So I keep a copy of it, but you actually won't find it out there. And China's a big part of my past, but it's less present in this book.
Well, it's interesting since you say that. I don't know that article, but maybe it's a republishing opportunity. Just throwing it out there, just food for thought. So
spoken like a good author.
Yeah. So in your new book, I want to know, why did you write this book? And your area is power and politics. So what is so different about your book versus all the other books out there on that topic?
Yeah, so it's very simple why I wrote the book. Some of this comes from kind of very personal feelings, which is I saw lots of really smart, hardworking people who were not getting ahead, right? They were getting stalled, derailed, frustrated. And the people who were kind of moving past them, if we talk about getting ahead, say upward in a company. And that was very frustrating. You know, people had worked for me, people I respected a lot. And so writing this book, okay, if you've seen the movie Moneyball, if you think about the scene they're having down in the garage, where he asks, you know, about his views on baseball, and the response when Brad Pitt asked that question is that people have an imperfect understanding of the game. And this is what I noticed, and that there was this kind of imperfect understanding of how, you know, you exceed or excel at some of the top levels in organizations, that it was all driven by, you know, hard work, being smart, et cetera. Then there was this huge dimension of power and politics, which a lot of people shied away from, and that really hurt them. And so that is the theme that drives me in a lot of my coaching. And then this book was an opportunity to pull that together and to share that kind of to a much broader audience. You hit a cap with people who you can work with one-on-one. And I would say there's a lot of fantastic books around power and politics, definitely from the academic world, which I draw from. But I would say where my book is different is I really wanted to think about how the process by which I work with people, the coaching process, because especially as soon as I say power and politics, people's, you know, the alarm bells go off of like evil. I don't want to do that stuff. It is crossing my values, et cetera. And so, I mean, this is where coaching is really beneficial, is kind of helping people work through that, or drawing on and seeing things, reframing things in different ways. So the book, I think, is much different in that regard of it's kind of elaborating some of the process, some of the tools, the steps that people need to go through in making that journey. And ultimately the goal is to challenge a lot of people. Not everyone's going to like it. To get people to think and to not shy away from these topics, because power is very critical right now. we're talking at a societal level. And so while the book is Get Promoted, it has a much larger message there around power and politics. And let me turn this back at you. When you wrote Communication Under Fire, in particular that one, and because I was rereading it again last night as we came into this, what was your goal there?
Well, and I'll say even with both of these, my belief is that your outer game is fueled by your inner game. And I've always thought of communication as the end of one process. It's the beginning of another, but there's a whole process behind it. And if you don't have things in alignment, you can't even have the conversation. The words are really the easy part. And you really need to get things aligned. You have to have your neurochemistry, your emotions, and let's call it your energy in alignment. And then once you get that, the word part is easy. So communication, people focus on words. Communication is a whole basket of stuff, and the words are the easiest part of it. So that's why I wrote that book, and why that, even though it's a communication book, there's a lot of little emotional intelligence nuggets in there, because you have to take care of some stuff before you can open your mouth.
Yeah, and it's also written in that very much of a coaching, right? A training framework by which people take various activities. So I liked it in that regard a lot.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you, when I was reading your book, I don't know if they still have dance studios or somewhere in the world. You see the pictures with the footsteps you see those icons with the footsteps on. It's like somebody's teaching you to 1, 2, cha-cha-cha, teaching you how to do dance and do the moves. I felt like when I was reading your book that I was following the steps, that I was going down the trail, that you were leading me down the path. And I think that your book is so practical and such a how-to. So, but I would also ask you, I love the title, I love the subtitle. What would be an alternate title for your book off the top of your head?
Actually, I went through a lot, and I think a lot of authors have to think about this in terms of what they're trying to accomplish with their book. But the two that, navigating power and politics was going to be one. And the other, which is the framework which I use, which is the rock, the map, and the snowball. Hard truth, the map is getting strategic, snowball is getting doing. But I didn't use those because when I went back and looked at all of my customers and people who come to me, and the words that they use, which I think words are incredibly powerful. And a huge majority come to me with this, what am I missing? I feel like I missed the playbook, and they want to come to get promoted. That's kind of the presenting challenge. Often when we dig into it, there's a lot of other things going on there, value, self-worth, etc. So we may end up in different places. But this title absolutely speaks to the pain, challenge, or opportunity that people are having. Whereas I'm not sure a lot of people will pick up navigating power and politics, and rock, map, and snowball. I think you need to be Malcolm Gladwell, which I'm not quite there yet. So
I would say I love the subtitle that you picked, because you can feel it.
And certainly the image on yours, you can feel it. And I almost kind of want to ask and jump right to this question, which is, it almost, and I think this is the test of like a great book, because yours was written almost 15 years ago. It's almost like your book was written for this moment right now. Things are really heating up. People aren't talking. Did that title come from somewhere? It's almost like it was written for today.
Well, it is definitely written for today, but it just goes to show you that people have always had this issue. When things heat up, people shut down. Whatever they do poorly, they often do more of that. And all the things that facilitate good conversations, they get diminished because people start protecting themselves, start being aggressive or retreating. So I noticed that, and take the business world, all the stresses we have, they're conversations that are, quote, under fire every day in the business world. And so I saw that, and I'm sad that it is even more appropriate today, but thank you for noticing that. So as you just wrote your book, so maybe it's too soon to ask, but is there anything you would change?
It's interesting you ask it. I think this is what's great about writing books now. It's actually what one of my editors was saying. He's like, you can always update it very quickly, right? I put this out to a lot of people early on because I think there's some sensitive topics in here, and I wanted to treat that in a appropriate way. Mm-hmm. And I think the number one thing is one of my former bosses. I sent it to him for an endorsement. He's been a serial CEO, and he didn't like it. That was his initial response. So we had a conversation, right? I think this is one of the things today, people aren't having conversations. We had an hour-long conversation about it, and I wanted to hear his point of view of where, and he also kind of wanted to hear mine. And in the end, he ended up writing a fantastic endorsement. But the point I want to make here is, and I think it would be an ongoing thing that I do with my coaching and the book here, is this idea that if there's kind of a superhighway out there that's going to benefit us all, more on-ramps, this kind of word that we both came up with, of how do you get people on to but to the idea. So this analogy of like creating on-ramps. And I think the book creates some obstacles for people, but I'd love to get more ideas. That's why I want to put the book out there of how do we create more on-ramps for people.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
What about you? Because there has been 15 years. What would you change?
I would add a chapter. I think I would call it Convo Horrors. And I would really kind of outline and diagram, analyze a really bad conversation in the workplace. And then I would reconstruct it from each point of view and show what each person could do to shift the conversation and shift the trajectory and change the outcome. So I would do some examples, a whole chapter of that with real key examples.
Oh, I love that. And I'm going to throw it back at you, a republishing opportunity.
Oh, maybe I'll call the next one Convo Horrors. Maybe that'll be the book.
And I can see videos there, or if I channel my daughter, there's probably TikTok in there. So.
Oh my goodness. So you're making it sound fun. I've got to get right on that. Let me write that down. So you've had such a unique past, and it is amazing. You've worked all over the world, and you have such interesting experiences, and you bring so much to the table. How has your past influenced your viewpoint and influenced your book?
So first, I would almost deflect this from myself, and just to say one of the things working with lots of clients is that we all have very unique stories, and those stories need to be told. And when I kind of work with individuals, it's kind of tapping into those stories, their uniqueness. When I think about it from my own perspective, which is a lot of it's been working globally, I will now say more than half my life has been outside the US, right, my home country. I would say two things here to keep it brief. One is that people are more similar than they're different. I think we play up differences a lot, but I think at base there are some core things around belonging. There are some things around how we, find respect. That these kind of principles, while the way they may be executed in different cultures or environments may be different, we're more similar than we're different. And so coaching people around the world as well has really kind of reinforced that. And I would say the second part is this. When I go back and look at my career, like every 5 years, I seem to have changed something, right? When I reach like peak, like could get to more power, I shift, like I go to a new environment. And I had to think about that a lot. but and I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best career advice sometimes if you're trying to move kind of up, depends what your goal is. But I thought about this kind of that it forces reinvention. And in many places I moved, I did not have, to use some of the words, like a power base. Like the first time I'm now in Spain, I came down here, I didn't know anyone in my wife's network, but and I came without a job. And so that was kind of further along in my career. So having to, build power or build a network and do things in new environments, like, in a Spanish company, for example, for a period I worked there. I think those things have really influenced how I think about and been attuned to things about power and politics. What about yourself? Because I saw something in your bio that you had trained people when they were shutting down a nuclear plant. And so if there's communication under fire, but what are some of the things that had influenced you?
Well, what influenced me is it's very similar in some ways, even though our life experience is very different, but I always found myself in places that I didn't belong. And it never bothered me because I've always had a quirky personality and I'm highly verbal and opinionated. So I kind of expected to be in places where I didn't really belong and had to figure out how to fit in. But it just became a natural thing for me. And in that process, since I don't have the cover that introverts have, the introverts have the cover of you don't know what they're thinking until they want you to. I'm a highly verbal extrovert with the sarcasm gene. You pretty much know what I'm thinking. And so as growing up, I had to learn how to leverage that, how to use it, how to have different kinds of conversations with people, what worked here, what didn't work there. And so that's just been my personal journey. I've always been fascinated by it. So I've had to figure out what make other people tick really quickly and how to find that commonality so that we could move forward. And so it just naturally became part of my work. And that's what, even in the books, that's what I'm always trying to do, is help people find the way they can communicate and connect with people where they are to bring them where you want them to be.
Well, there's huge demand for that right now. So keep doing what you're doing.
So who influenced you? Because you're so special. You have such compassion. You're a great thinker. You're very thoughtful. You have compassion and you tell the truth and you will be direct. So that's a combination that we all want, but you don't always find all of those together. Who influenced you?
Well, I mean, I think there's huge amounts with my family, with my mother and my father and my grandparents, who I was blessed to have all around me, and, Chinese and kind of US Germanic side. But just to go right at this, it was actually the bosses I used to have who also kicked my ass. And I just, I think as we go through the arcs of our careers, you're like, it's the ones who are toughest on you that you remember the most. And I'm very good at keeping in touch with people. A lot of it's still up here. But I remember things about people, and that's a great way of forming connections. And I have gone back to many of them, to ask, like, what were you thinking at that time? Like, you kind of demoted me. You made this weird decision. You hired someone in like the VP of sales position that you used to, like, in private conversations with me, said was terrible. And so being able, kind of in hindsight, and I think this is a part of, processing things, that was very insightful to me, because people may say one thing, but then what they're really processing or how they're doing things. So that was also a big influence here on the book, when they started to tell the truth around how they made decisions or why. What about you?
Well, my biggest influence was my dad. He is, no disrespect to you or myself as coaches, my dad is the best coach I've ever met. It amazes me as I learn through my practice, through my work experience in the corporate world, and through my training and my coaching practice, all of that, it is shocking to me how many times I realize I learned that from my dad, or that's what my dad was trying to teach me. And that's how he handled a certain thing. So I realize the more I've learned, the more I've realized I already knew that I was just anchored. Sorry about that. I was anchored in some of these practices from my dad. And he had the benefit of raising me. I wasn't easy. So he had a lot of moves that were really good and really helped me have self-discovery. And that's what we do. That's the most, we all know that's the most meaningful learning, is having self-discovery. So, I'm very grateful for that. So it looks like we are probably getting near the end. So I do want to ask this question though, before we end. So we always talk about being strategic and being intentional. And I read your book, and I know we both have this idea of being strategic versus being reactionary. So is getting people to be more thoughtful so that they can be more successful, is it as simple as that?
Well, I almost want to hear your response first, but I would, I actually just say yes. I mean, I think it is as simple as that. And I've been listening to some of the talks all week, and a lot of it is being able to, I got kids now, teenagers. So it's like hitting the pause button, taking kind of a step back, and being strategic and intentional in responses. And that's, you have to kind of rehearse that. You have to kind of anticipate those things, which is why I liked rereading your book last night, because it was like, here are some steps. Yeah, when you're in the moment, it's almost too late. You've got to kind of have practiced those things. And so it also fits with one of my sayings, which is, hope is not a strategy. So being strategic, planning, doing. But your thought on this?
I would say yes also. And I would just layer on to that with your own unique spin. Because one of the things which is a big thing with me now is that along the way, as we change to try to fit and mold ourselves into whatever our vision of success is, sometimes you lose your magic. Sometimes you lose the thing that will be the thing that will help you change the world, that will help you change the workplace, that will help you change your company. So I would say, yes, it's 100% that. And also being cognizant of what specialness do you bring that you can use and help in situations. So in your book, I don't want to spoil the book, but people can read your book and have a clear sense of how to start thinking differently and how to behave differently. So what would you say was a practical nugget from your book that you can leave with folks?
Well, I tried to give lots of practical nuggets, and actually, if I have to pick one, which goes back to a previous question of what I would have built up more, because it got me thinking a lot this week during Meet a We. But one of the things I do with a lot of individuals that I coach is we kind of sit down and we go through. They list their sources of power. Okay, it feels like maybe a little bit of an academic exercise, but if you really think of these categories, which I lay out in the book, I keep it simplified, right? Because academics will give you like 12 categories. The act of listing out where you have value or have sources of power, incredibly important. And thinking about what is value you bring, who may value that in your organization, what is also unique versus what 10 other people also have that value. I mean, right there, if you find the things that other people really value, particularly those in power, that you uniquely hold that other people do not, that is a tremendous source of power. And most people don't tap into those things. Most people do not tap into those things. So, Alice Walker has a quote that I really like, which is, people give away their power, by thinking they don't have any. And so that's a huge first step. And for you, practical piece to take away from your book? I know people can get it, but.
Well, practical piece for me, and it shows up in a lot of my work, is very similar to what you said, in pieces of what you said, and that is know your hot buttons. That is a huge thing with me. I find we have a tendency when our hot buttons are pushed to have this reaction like it's never been pushed before. Like, what? And like, we didn't see it coming. Yeah, you see it coming. Know your hot buttons and plan on them being pushed at some point or other, and have a strategy in place for how maybe you can anticipate it coming, maybe you can't, but certainly how you're going to deal with it and how you are going to shift things back on track, and especially shift yourself back on track if that hot button is pushed.
Yeah, that's what I loved about the book, because there's a lot of things about communication out there, but this is very much around when you're under fire and the heat is on.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So I have a question. I'm just want to ask, did anything pop up in chat that we need to answer before we wrap up?
I think there was just a request to use your graphic on social media. Sounds like.
Oh, nice. Very good.
So,
this is where we can learn from everyone. My daughter has given me, graphic advice.
Oh, great. Maybe I should consult your daughter. That is perfect. So how much time do we have? I'm thinking we're running near the end.
we're actually at time.
Okay, can I do one more thing?
Sure.
Okay, so one more thing is, Michael, how do people reach you and how do they get your book?
Yeah, so anticipated, right? So it is there on the screen. Wenderoth is my website, and the book will release in April. You can get 2 of the chapters free off of there. So
good.
That's how they reach me. And Polaris Consulting or LinkedIn, what is the best way to reach you?
Yes, polarisconsulting.biz is the best way, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you both, Michael and Albanita, for sharing your time and your thoughts. I just want to say, but from both sides, it sounds like there's a lot of preparation for us internally before we even get to start to interacting with other people. So would highly recommend for people to take a look at these books and do that internal preparation for whatever they want to achieve, whether it's getting promoted or just communicating better or interacting with the people around us. So thank you both.
Thank you.